In the dead of winter, when the world is buried beneath endless snow and silence rules the night, the last thing you expect is danger lurking just beyond the frozen veil. But what if I told you that behind those snow-covered trees, inside that seemingly abandoned cabin, or even on the icy surface of a lake, something sinister could be waiting? Imagine being a child caught in a blizzard, and a stranger with a twisted smile invites you into a house that should have been empty. Picture yourself and your friends skiing down a mountain, only to realize that the beautiful strangers you trusted might be leading you into a trap. Or standing on a frozen lake, believing you're staring at a wild animal, until you see a man in a bare suit dragging something across the ice. These are not legends. These are true stories of winter horror that will chill you to the bone. Welcome to The Price Paid, where we uncover the terrifying reality hidden in everyday places. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will haunt your next snowy night. Don't forget to subscribe before the darkness finds you first. I grew up with winters that felt both magical and menacing. My family owned a small vacation home in Colorado, a place my parents bought long before I was born, because they were passionate skiers. That house carried decades of stories within its walls. It had peeling paint, creaky wooden floors, and a roof that always seemed one snowfall away from collapsing. Yet it was our retreat in the mountains. My dad constantly worked on fixing it, replacing boards and patching leaks, but he often said the whole place would need to be torn down someday. For my brother and me, however, it was a playground set against the endless white backdrop of the Rockies. One winter, when I was 8 years old and my brother Josh was 11, we found ourselves trapped in the middle of a powerful blizzard. The snow fell so heavily that it blanketed the world in silence, creating an eerie, suffocating kind of peace. To us as children, that silence was an invitation. Wrapped in layers of puffy coats and boots, Josh and I ran outside to play in the storm. The property stretched out like an open field surrounded by woods, and just beyond lay a dead-end road lined with other vacation homes, most of them empty. The emptiness gave the place a lonely kind of beauty, but it also meant we were isolated, our only company being each other and the snow. We had invented a game to make the cold afternoons pass more quickly. Each of us would build a fort from snow, hidden in plain sight, and inside we would place a giant snowball we called the Jewel. The goal was to sneak into the other's fort, steal the Jewel, and bring it back without getting caught. That day, Josh chose a spot on the neighboring property. The family who owned it rarely came up during winter, so it was perfect for our games. He disappeared down the road to set up his base, promising to blow a whistle once he was ready. I waited, the icy air stinging my cheeks, but the sound never came. 5 minutes turned into 10. The silence stretched, and my 8-year-old mind began to imagine the worst. I decided he must have started without telling me, so I set off down the road, trudging through snow that reached up to my knees. I avoided the woods, because the thought of wandering through the trees during a blizzard was too terrifying. As I approached the neighboring property, I scanned the landscape for Josh. His fort was there, a lumpy wall of snow behind which the Jewel should have been, but he was nowhere to be seen. My chest tightened. I crept closer, eyes darting between the empty driveway and the tree line. That was when I heard it. A woman's voice called out, "Excuse me, are you looking for your brother?" I froze. Standing on the front steps of the neighboring house was an older woman, her gray hair pulled back, her lips stretched into a strange, forced smile. I told her we were playing a game, but she shook her head and said, "Your brother isn't here." Her words made no sense. My eyes darted up toward the second floor, and there in one of the windows I saw someone watching me. Only half a face was visible, hidden beneath a black beanie, the rest concealed behind the frame. The sight made my stomach drop. I noticed footprints in the snow leading to the house. They looked like Josh's, but then I saw something worse. The tracks doubled back toward the woods, as though he had run away. I shouted his name, my voice breaking the quiet, and the woman's smile vanished. She motioned for me to come inside to get warm, her hand waving me forward. That simple gesture felt wrong, too rehearsed, too demanding. Before I could move, I heard heavy footsteps thundering from inside the house, someone large descending the stairs. My body reacted before my mind did. I turned and bolted, heart pounding, snow spraying up with every step. The woman screamed something after me. Words lost to the storm, but I did not dare look back. I ran until I heard the sharp, familiar whistle of my dad cutting through the blizzard. Relief flooded me as I reached our driveway, where my father and Josh were already waiting. My brother's face was pale. He said people had been in the house, calling him inside. My story spilled out of me in fragments. but the terror in our voices told my dad enough. He grabbed a heavy object from the garage, something to defend himself, and marched toward the neighbor's property. We waited in silence with our mother, every minute feeling like an hour. When my father finally returned, his face was tight with worry. He said the front door was locked and no one had answered, but he had gone to another neighbor who knew the real owners. They confirmed what made my blood run cold. The house was supposed to be empty. No one had been there that weekend. The police were called. Josh and I gave shaky descriptions of the woman and the strange figure in the window.
Wake up, please, wake up.
Officers found the back door unlocked, but the place was empty. Nothing stolen, no clear signs of a break-in, just that overwhelming sense that someone had been living there in the shadows. After that night, my parents made sure to remove anything valuable from our cabin, worried that thieves would strike again. But the fear that clung to me was not about stolen objects. It was the thought of what would have happened if I had stepped inside that house. My brother and I never played near that property again.
Just a little further.
Even now, years later, the memory of that woman's smile and the figure watching from the upstairs window haunts me whenever I think about snow-covered houses sitting empty in the mountains. Thank God we never went inside. The second story happened many years later, when winter was still my favorite season, but I was no longer a child. By then I was 21, a senior in college, and nothing seemed more exciting than a ski trip with close friends. We drove to Vermont, the place everyone in the Northeast swore had the best slopes. The mountain we went to stretched out across peaks and valleys, with chairlifts crisscrossing like veins. I cannot remember if it was Killington or another resort, but I remember the vastness. There were so many trails that even after 2 full days, we had not covered them all. That weekend it was me, Amir, Rylan, and Jaden. We had been skiing for hours, tearing down the double blacks, racing each other with a kind of reckless joy that only comes when you are young, free, and slightly drunk. We carried little bottles of Fireball whiskey in our jackets, taking swigs whenever we paused to catch our breath. It was stupid, but it made us laugh. And on that cold mountain, the burn of liquor felt like courage. The sun was beginning to sink, and we were debating how to finish our last run when everything changed. 2 girls appeared at the top of the lift, walking straight toward us without helmets. One had long dark hair, the other a striking blonde, both of them radiant in a way that made us stare. It is not often that 2 strangers appear out of nowhere on a mountain, especially strangers who seem so effortlessly beautiful. They introduced themselves as Taylor and Devin and began chatting like we had been waiting for them all along. They joked that the slopes were full of old folks and that they had been searching for people their own age. Their energy disarmed us, especially Emmer, who always leaned into flirtation, and Ryland, who followed any adventure with a smile. The conversation felt casual at first, but something about the way they carried themselves unsettled me. Devin asked technical questions about skis, clearly impressed by Amir and Ryland's expensive gear compared to Jaden and me who had rented. Taylor laughed at our bottles of Fireball, and then Devin produced her own drink, a clear, unmarked bottle. She dared us to prove we could handle something stronger. Amir and Ryland were eager to accept. Jaden reluctantly drank. And when the bottle reached me, I pretended to sip, the liquid burning my lips but never touching my tongue. That small choice may have saved my life. They mentioned a trail we had never heard of, Devil's Forest, a name that sent a shiver down my back even before I realized how unusual it was. None of us had seen it on the maps, but Devin swore it was real, a hidden glade that only locals knew. Glade trails were our favorite, weaving between trees, dangerous but thrilling. The promise of adventure was enough to sway Amir and Ryland instantly, and with hesitant glances, Jaden and I followed. We removed our skis to climb a short incline, trudging through snow in a part of the mountain where no one else seemed to be. The silence of that place pressed against me like a warning. As we reached the forest, the trees closed in, and the ground sloped downward. Devin and Taylor pointed into the shadows, assuring us that this was the entrance. Jaden voiced his doubts, but the girls insisted it would lead us right back to the lifts. Then Devin pulled the bottle again, demanding we finish it before continuing. This time I watched closely. Neither of them drank, only pressed it on us with smiles that cracked too quickly. Ryland and Amir took heavy swigs, Jaden resisted, and I only pretended again. In that instant, I caught a flicker of something in Devin's face, a flash of anger before the mask returned. My stomach tightened. Something was wrong. We clipped our skis back on and followed them down the slope. The snow was fresh and deep, no tracks before ours, which struck me as strange for a supposedly known trail. When we reached the bottom, the forest surrounded us. No lift in sight. I demanded to know where we were, but they brushed it off, promising the lift was close. That was when Ryland collapsed into the snow, unconscious. At first, the girls laughed, calling him a lightweight, but Amir fell soon after, and the laughter twisted into silence. Jaden cursed, stepping toward them, and then he too crumpled, lifeless in the white powder. My heart raced as I realized the truth. Whatever was in that bottle was not alcohol. I staggered, dizzy, my vision swimming, but I forced myself to stay conscious, clawing against the weight dragging me down. Devin and Taylor stopped pretending. They stared at me coldly, as though waiting for me to fall. When I did not, Devin hissed that I must not have drunk enough, and Taylor urged her to leave. Together they unclipped Amir and Ryland's expensive skis, hoisting them with effort, and began dragging them through the snow. I could barely move, but rage fueled me. They were not just thieves. The way they acted, the way they led us here, it was too elaborate for simple robbery. I stumbled after them, following their tracks, until the trees opened to reveal a clearing. My breath froze in my chest. A van waited at the edge of the road, and from it stepped 4 men, broad-shouldered, their faces hard. One of them pointed directly at me, and the girls hurried toward them with the skis. I did not wait to see what would happen next. I turned back, stumbling through my own trail, terrified they would chase me. Somehow, they did not. Perhaps they thought I would collapse like the others. Perhaps they had already gotten what they wanted. When I returned to my friends, they were still unconscious, their bodies motionless against the snow. I shook Jaden violently, rubbing snow against his face until his eyes fluttered open. Together we managed to guard Amir and Ryland until they finally stirred an hour later. None of us fully understood what had happened, but I explained what I had seen. The van, the men, the way the girls abandoned us once they thought we were gone. Fear and confusion weighed heavier than exhaustion as we struggled back toward the main resort. Finding the car felt like crawling out of a nightmare. Reporting it to the police was humiliating, as though they doubted our story, though eventually it was taken seriously enough to make local news. Still, no one was ever found. No arrests, no explanation. Even now I think about it. The way those women smiled, the way the men appeared at the edge of the forest, the way my friends fell like dominoes after a few sips. There is no drink that acts that fast, no single substance that can do that so effectively. Maybe it was a mix of drugs, maybe something darker, something we will never understand. What haunts me most is not knowing what they planned for us once we were unconscious. Maybe it was robbery, but maybe it was worse. Maybe it was something we were never meant to survive. Sometimes I wonder if the only reason I am still here is because I did not drink enough to fall asleep in the snow. Sometimes I wonder if that choice was the only thing standing between life and death. Every winter has its rituals, little traditions that seem harmless until one day they are not. For my friends and me, that ritual was walking out onto a frozen lake a few towns over. It was not a grand event, just something simple that gave us a sense of freedom. We would smoke, laugh, and take photographs against the surreal landscape of ice and snow. There was something comforting about the stillness, about the way the frozen surface reflected the moonlight so that even at night it never felt entirely dark. The silence of a snowy winter night carries a strange beauty. But as we learned, it can also be suffocating. It happened only last winter, when the air was so cold that our breath crystallized as we spoke. Kyle was driving that night in his pickup, and Ricky and I sat in the back with our heavy coats zipped up to our chins. We parked in a lot near the edge of the lake, since the thin forest surrounding it made it impossible to drive closer. The snow was falling in soft waves, muffling every sound, and the 3 of us trudged toward the water with our boots sinking into the drifts. I remember thinking how alive I felt in that moment, the kind of exhilaration that comes from being somewhere isolated, like the world belongs only to you. We stepped onto the lake cautiously, testing the ice. As we moved further from the shore, Kyle tossed a small rock onto the surface, watching it bounce without so much as a crack, and that was all the reassurance we needed. Soon we were 100 feet from land, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the pale glow of the moon. The surface of the ice shimmered beneath us, reflecting the night sky. For a while we joked and told stories, our voices carrying across the open expanse. That was when we saw it. On the opposite edge of the lake, near the tree line, something moved. At first it looked like a shadow too large to be an animal, hunched over and dragging something behind it. Ricky whispered that it might be a bear, but the shape did not walk like an animal. Its posture was wrong, too upright, too human. Our laughter stopped. We stood in silence, straining our eyes as it drew closer. Then the truth revealed itself. It was a man dressed in a full bear suit, shuffling across the snow with deliberate slowness. The sight made my blood run cold. There was no reason for someone to be out there, dressed like that, dragging a heavy black bag across the ice. The figure moved closer, and I realized he was holding a rope. The bag dragged behind him, small enough to be carried but heavy enough to require effort. I could not stop staring at the way it scraped across the snow, leaving a trail like a wound across the white surface. Kyle muttered a curse under his breath, but none of us moved. The man in the bear suit reached a spot in the middle of the ice and stopped. Slowly, he unzipped the suit, stepping out of it as though shedding a second skin. Beneath, he looked ordinary, not particularly tall or imposing, but somehow that made it worse. There was no mask of fur to hide behind anymore. He was just a man, and what he was about to do was all too clear. He bent down and picked up a rock, slamming it against the ice again and again. The sound echoed across the frozen lake, each strike sharp and deliberate, each one vibrating under our feet as though the ice itself was trembling. He was trying to break through, trying to open a hole. The bag lay at his side like a waiting secret. My throat tightened as I realized what that meant. He wanted to sink it beneath the surface, to bury it in the black water forever. Ricky touched my arm and gestured toward the shore. Kyle was already moving, his footsteps soft but urgent, and I followed, though every step felt like thunder in my ears. We were not far when the man's voice broke through the night. He shouted, a single word. Hey! The sound was sharp, commanding, and for a second I thought it had pierced the ice beneath us. None of us turned around. We ran, our lungs burning in the frigid air, our boots slipping on the slick surface. The weight of his voice chased us even after we reached the safety of the shore. We collapsed against the trees, gasping, too afraid to look back. Eventually, Kyle started the truck and we drove in silence, the headlights carving a path through the storm. None of us spoke of it until Ricky finally whispered what we had all been thinking. That bag was not trash. No one would wear a bear suit to dump garbage in the middle of a frozen lake. He said it must have been a body. I wanted to argue, but the words would not come. The image of that small bag dragging across the ice played in my head again and again. It had seemed too small for a person, yet too strange to be anything ordinary. For days afterward, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a hunter disposing of animal remains. Maybe some twisted prank. But the unease did not fade. And then weeks later, my mother was watching television when a missing child's photo appeared on the screen. The timeline of the disappearance matched the night we had been at the lake. My stomach dropped as if the ice had finally cracked beneath me. I cannot say with certainty that what we saw was connected, but in my heart I cannot dismiss it either. The man in the bear suit remains etched in my mind, a figure that should have been absurd but instead was monstrous. Sometimes at night I wake with the sound of ice breaking still echoing in my ears. Sometimes I see his silhouette in the corner of my memory, dragging that bag across the snow, and I wonder what lay inside. We never went back to that lake. Maybe we should have gone to the police right away. Maybe our silence allowed something unspeakable to remain hidden beneath the frozen water. What I do know is that winter no longer feels like safety. The snow may silence the world, but it also hides things better left unseen. The three stories may seem like separate events, each taking place in different places with different people, but when you look closer, there is a thread tying them together. It is not the snow itself that makes them terrifying. It is the way winter strips away the safety of the world, leaving people vulnerable to dangers that are far more human than supernatural. Snow muffles sound, blurs vision, isolates homes, and makes every step harder. In that silence and isolation, things can happen that you would never believe possible. What these stories reveal is that the most chilling horrors are not ghosts or legends, but strangers with hidden intentions. In Colorado, two young brothers nearly walked into a trap inside a neighbor's house that was supposed to be empty. They were children playing a simple game, yet behind that game waited someone who wanted them inside. A smiling woman at the door and a figure in the upstairs window created an image that still makes the heart race. If they had taken one more step, if fear had not made them run, no one knows what would have happened. The snowstorm kept neighbors away, the blizzard erased sounds, and the isolation turned a simple childhood memory into a nightmare that clung to them long after the storm had passed. Years later, in Vermont, 4 college students went to the mountains for fun, for adrenaline, for the kind of wild weekend that feels unforgettable. They met 2 women who seemed like a dream, who laughed at their jokes and lured them toward a hidden trail with the promise of adventure. But the laughter was only a mask. The bottle of clear liquid, the trail that did not exist on any map, the men waiting in the van at the edge of the forestall of it points to a plan that had nothing to do with skiing. The students were targeted, tested, poisoned, and almost delivered into the hands of strangers. If not for one small act of caution, they might have disappeared into the snow like so many others whose stories are never told. Then there is the frozen lake, where 3 friends believed they were alone in the quiet beauty of winter. Out there in the middle of the ice, surrounded by nothing but the pale light of the moon, they discovered a man wearing a bear suit dragging a bag across the frozen surface. He was not playing a game, he was not lost, and he was not innocent. He was trying to destroy something, to bury it beneath the ice forever. They fled, hearts pounding, their boots pounding against the ice, as his voice chased them. Later, the memory of that black bag merged with the image of a missing child on the news, and a terrible possibility took shape. The snow had hidden something unspeakable, and perhaps it still hides it now. Each of these stories carries the same message. The cold does not care about you. The snow will not protect you. And sometimes it is not nature you should fear, but the people who walk among us. A blizzard, a mountain slope, or a frozen lake are only settings, stages upon which hidden darkness reveals itself. In those moments when the world is stripped bare, when neighbors are absent, when you trust strangers because they smile, the true danger shows its face. And once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. Think about how fragile the boundary was in each story. One step inside that house, one real sip from that bottle, one moment of hesitation on the lake, and the outcomes would have been catastrophes. The difference between safety and disaster came down to instinct, to fear, to the simple decision to run. It is terrifying to realize that so much depends on a single moment. It makes you question how many other times you brushed shoulders with danger without ever knowing. How many smiling faces hid darker truths? How many times did silence conceal something you should have noticed? What makes these winter horrors unforgettable is not only the fear they caused in the moment, but the lingering shadow they left behind. A child who will never forget the strange woman's grin. A college student who will never drink from a stranger's bottle again. A group of friends who can no longer look at a frozen lake without remembering the echo of breaking ice. These are scars that remain long after the snow has melted, proof that some memories do not fade with time. And maybe that is the true horror of winter. It is not just the cold or the storms or the way snow erases the world, it is the way it makes the darkness inside people stand out even more. The season that should be about family, about holidays, about beauty, becomes a backdrop for danger. The white snow does not cleanse, it conceals. Behind every cabin window, every empty trail, every stretch of frozen water, there could be something waiting that you will never be ready for. So when you hear the wind howl through the trees and you see the snow piling high against your door, remember these stories. Remember that not every smile is safe, not every invitation should be accepted, and not every shadow is as harmless as it first appears. The chill you feel might not only come from the air. Sometimes it comes from the knowledge that the worst monsters are not mythical creatures or winter spirits. They are people, walking quietly through the snow, waiting for someone who is not paying attention. And the silence of winter gives them all the cover they need. When you place these stories side by side, a chilling truth emerges. Winter, with all its beauty and silence, has a way of revealing the darkest sides of humanity. A child nearly lured into an empty home by strangers pretending to be neighbors. A group of college friends almost poisoned and delivered to men waiting in a van at the edge of the woods. 3 young men who stumbled upon someone in a bear suit dragging a mysterious bag across a frozen lake. These were not accidents of nature, not storms or accidents on the ice. They were deliberate acts by people whose motives were as frightening as the snowstorm itself. The lesson is as stark as the winter landscape. Danger often hides where you least expect it, and sometimes the biggest threat is not the environment, but the people who move through it. A blizzard may silence the world, but it also gives predators cover. An empty vacation home may seem safe, but it can become the perfect trap. A stranger's smile can disguise intentions you never imagined. These stories remind us that fear is not always irrational. Sometimes, fear is what saves you. Running instead of stepping inside that house saved 2 children. Pretending to drink instead of swallowing every sip saved a young man's life. Leaving the frozen lake instead of confronting a strange figure saved 3 friends from whatever horror was inside that black bag. If you ever find yourself in a situation like these, remember this. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Do not go into places you know should be empty. Do not accept drinks from strangers when you cannot see what is inside. Do not linger when every bone in your body is telling you to run. Being cautious does not make you weak. It makes you alive. And the people who survived these encounters did so because they listened to the voice inside that told them something was off. It is easy to think these stories are distant, that they happen to someone else in some other place. But danger does not send invitations. It waits in the shadows of everyday life. That is what makes these accounts so terrifying. They could have happened to anyone. They remind us that safety is fragile, that a single decision can mean the difference between survival and vanishing without a trace. So the next time you hear the wind against your window on a snowy night, or you see an empty house across the street, or a stranger offers you something too good to be true, remember the people in these stories. Remember that survival often comes down to the simplest of choices. And remember that the most dangerous monsters are not myths, but human beings who hide their darkness behind ordinary masks. If these stories send a chill through your spine, then stay with us, because there are more truths like this waiting to be uncovered. This is The Price Paid. Subscribe now before the next story finds you.